Welcome everyone. Thank you for accepting our invitation and making the time to speak with us on this panel discussion. We are very, very excited to hear from you all. I am Veda Agarwal, a climate activist, worker, and entrepreneur working with the Initiative for Climate Action, a non-profit based out of Bangalore towards creating transformative climate action for systemic regeneration. We are a community of over 40 volunteers reimagining what climate action might mean to India by way of thought leadership, initiating structural changes in systems today, and supporting innovations, talent, and niche efforts in this direction. Through the panel, I will be switching between Hindi and English in my moderation to accommodate for all panelists. We are here today to talk about the topic of radical climate justice for global commons, or if I say it in Hindi, वैश्विक लोक के लिए उग्र जलवायु न्याय. What we speak about today will be presented at the University of California, Santa Barbara's virtual conference taking place from the 4th to 25th of October in 2021. To start off with, let me introduce our panelists very briefly before I invite them all to share more about themselves. Our first panelist, Anil Tharayat, is the current coordinator of the Delhi Forum. Delhi Forum is a 5-decade-old network space of various social movements who work on the issue of land, water, and forests. Delhi Forum fundamentally works on the campaign aspects of these issues. He has been part of many fish workers' alliances in India and comments extensively on governance, power structures, and policies of the state. Our second panelist, Jesu Rathinam, is director of SNEHA, Social Need Education and Human Awareness, based in Tamil Nadu, and an advisor for the National Fish Workers Forum. She has been working with small-scale fisher workers and is a researcher on coastal issues and has a long experience in organizing fishers on various issues including aquaculture, thermal power plants, and ports. Kumari Bai Jankatan is from Kochi Taluka in Gadchiroli. She is a member of the Maha Gram Sabha as well as facilitates women collectives in Kochi. As part of local collectives, they have been resisting against mining proposals in their area while also conserving and managing their forests. Mayalmet Lepcha has worked tirelessly as a volunteer for an organization called the Affected Citizens of Teesta, or ACT, which is fighting to protect the Lepcha's ancestral lands from hydropower projects, developments they consider a major threat to their environment, community, and culture. She is also the president of Sikkim Indigenous Lepcha Tribal Association, or SILTA. Finally, our fifth panelist, Rajni Bakshi, is a Mumbai-based journalist and author. She writes about social and political movements in contemporary India. Rajni is the founder and curator of Ahimsa Conversations, an online platform for exploring the possibilities of nonviolence. So let us get us started. We will start with Namrata setting the context for us, 3 rounds of comments and answers to questions for the panelists before closing and concluding, with Abharaj taking up concluding remarks. Namrata, may I hand over to you?
Thank you, Vedita, and once again, welcome to all the panelists. Thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us in this event on radical climate justice for global commons. Our panel proposal is learning on climate justice for the global commons with communities from India. When this panel was called on for submitting proposals, our greatest motivation was to bring upon community voices on these platforms, because we really feel that a lot of times community voices and perspectives are not part of such global climate conferences, least of all the COP processes. And in India especially, and I think it's true for the rest of the world as well, that commons have largely been stewarded by the traditional knowledge of local communities and indigenous communities. And that's why our greatest motivation for this event was to bring those voices to this panel. And just a bit of an introduction of what is the climate in the country right at the moment, and how the policies have been, which is definitely extractive policies on the state's part, and climate change impacts have been continuously felt, but very differentially and disproportionately within communities. Not everyone is equally impacted because of their different vulnerabilities. And there is a denial of community participation in climate decision making. That is one side of the climate justice domain where we see like the problems and the solutions. What we think and that we are speaking through this session is community perspectives with the changing climate, successes, failures, learnings relating to climate justice and resilience, um, perspectives on radicalizing the climate justice movement and connections between local and global. Uh, Climate justice, like any other justice movements that have been, be it social justice, environmental justice, gender justice, racial justice, have all gone through these phases of similar, challenging, same kind of predominantly narratives. And we feel like climate justice is not new in that sense, it's just a new narrative, but it is also in a way of a platform or a more to harmonize all the injustices and inequalities that we have in our world. Um, Moving forward to how like the session really wants to address or look at the questions of how we can envision a radical climate justice movement at this time and age where all the latest IPCC reports or probably we don't even have to look at the reports because we are feeling the impacts of them so vividly that the urgency is definitely there and we definitely need to uh, build some tactics and strategies that we actually address to bring about uh, justice for the global commons. And one of the ways it could be through listening to each other with care and holding spaces for generative and regenerative conversations like we are having today, where everybody is a participant in the decision-making process, is given voice, is given a platform to raise their issues, concerns, learnings, successes, and failures, all of them. And through this interactions, what we can really do is share the pluriverse of alternatives that could take us to a place where we actually adapt to climate change impacts, because the impacts are going to be felt no matter what actions we take or do not take at this point. And also, this conversation really wants to see that how can we make our movement so big enough, so broad enough, so intersectional and urgent enough to slow down humanity's accelerating appointment with a disaster that is already a part of our reality. So over to all of you all to share your perspectives, and thank you once again. Back to you, Vedita.
Thank you, Namrata. Could I now invite all panelists to introduce themselves, their work, and share initial reflections on Namrata's context on the topic of climate justice, climate resilience, people's movements, alternatives, radicalism, whatever just stood out for you. So Rajni ji, can I invite you to please get us started? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Firstly, I really thank the organizers for including me in what is actually a forum for community voices, people who are working on the ground, whereas I live in the absolute comfort of urban, high eco footprint existence. So I really appreciate that. So I have been a follower and a supporter, and in some ways a member of various movements and groups seeking alternatives for the last, I would say, almost 40 years. And I think one reason why maybe I'm here today is that about 12 years ago, I wrote a book called Bazaars, Conversations and Freedom for a Market Culture Beyond Greed and Fear. And I'll be drawing on that experience to share with all of you what today is the basic vidambana. हम हिंदी में उसको vidambana कहते हैं. In English, we can say paradoxical tragedy. That at one level, the harsh truth is that no matter what we do in our own backyard, in our own village, in our own region, we are now all subject to trends which we have no control over, which is basically the ways in which the world's weather patterns are changing. That is really the far end of the grimness of the scenario. And yet, it becomes even more important for us to visualize how we can survive, thrive, and offer a counter vision for a future. Because I personally believe, this is my conviction, we have no choice but to be optimistic, because pessimism is for better times. I think I'll close here, and then I look forward to saying more later in the other sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajni ji. Anil ji, may I invite you to please introduce yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. Thanks to all organizers for actually inviting me, and it's humbling enough to be in a esteemed panel. So I am Anil. I consider myself as a solidarity worker with different movements across India, different allies of fish workers movements, different anti-displacement movements, different movements which have been working on the implementation of Forest Rights Act. While we try to do this one, there are different human rights violations, police atrocities, all sorts of state responses. So one actually, as far as I work with Delhi Forum's work has been largely trying to address these issues at a local level, at a regional level, at a national level, based on the demands and the demands which come from the movements. So we work with a host of different kind of movements and networks largely. So we cater to their demands and responses, and I think this is a very important topic. And how do we radicalize ourselves in different contexts, different situations? It's not that like how Namrata told in the beginning, you know, different coinages come at different time periods. Environmental justice, climate justice, because your issues are also getting new models come in. When you try to address something, the capitalism itself brings out with a new issue, new kind of a new kind of a, it's like an old wine in a new bottle. But however, one thing which I find very important is the advancement of technology, and the kind of, on one side you have multimillionaires actually going to Mars. On one side they are buying actually farms. On one side they are writing books on how can we make a good environment. Bill Gates has written a new book apparently. It's this is, on one side they're promoting artificial intelligence as a solution to everything, removing labor completely from the ground, shifting human beings from that part of labor basically. And on the other side, they are actually giving solutions for everything. And now, how do we how do we look at people who are working on the ground, who are actually living their lives, and how do we listen to them, how do we amplify it, how do we stand with them, looking holistically with human beings, nature and all, how we can live together. I am also not sure that whether we can address this climate change as soon as possible or something like that, looking at the new reports also of IPCC and all. Things are looking grim. But even then, in the times of hopelessness, having hope is the most courageous thing to do, like how Rajni ji actually said. And I'll stop here and over to you, Veda.
Thank you, Anil ji. Jesu ji, may I please invite you to share your initial comments?
Yes. I would like to say that this is a right time, because there are three IPCC reports which have come, and we never cared for it. The entire world did not give much importance to it. And now in 2021, when it is saying the land is eroding and will be sunk into the sea, now we are thinking of it. At least now we are able to think, because we are really in a crisis situation. That is true. And the topic as such, what you have mentioned as global commons, I would like to make a few comments. That is, as such, not personally, politically believe that there is no global commons as such, because what is global commons has to be defined. Global commons, yes, the sea, especially in the sea, I would like to say, there is no commons as such. What is stated by the government is, state is that beyond 200 nautical miles, they define it as high seas, and they declare that as commons, global commons for the, that is really it is for corporatizing and leaving to the corporates that beyond to the heights. Um, that is what is that is what is going to happen. So that is the question of global commons. Actually, resource dependent communities have commons. They have commons for themselves, for the resource, that is, if it is farming community, if it is forest communities, they who are dependent on resources of the forest and dependent on the land and pastoral land, they have they have had commons that even is now being privatized and taken by the corporates. So the whole question of commons has to be defined exactly. Otherwise, having a broader term as global commons doesn't give a real sense. That is one thing. And then the land-based communities, if we can say, there was a survey in 1996 in India. I'm talking especially in India, and in 1996 that was the 57th report, which has done a survey and marked some commons like ponds, lakes, livestock, and that is the National Sample Survey of India did that. And we can say for land, for forest, yes, we have, and there are also some legal legislations which talk about like and the categorization of land like Panjami land, land for the tillers, and then for the forests also. But what do we have for the fishers? That's a big question to be answered. So when we talk of common, CRZ is the first thing which comes to the mind. That is coast and ocean, the coastal lands and the oceans, the sea where they are fishing, are the commons for fishers. But there is no survey like the land or like the forest. There was no survey to really categorize these are commons for the small scale fishers or the women. Even in CRZ, it talks of categorization for which industry can be allowed in which zones. So really, it is not a thing of commons for the fishers. So in this, I think in this context, we have to look into it, and then coming to ICC, we have to talk. So since it is mentioned about global commons, and I thought these are my initial thoughts which I should share. Thank you.
थैंक यू सो मच जीसू जी. कुमारी भाई, क्या आप अपना परिचय दे सकते हैं? थोड़ा सा हमें अपनी काम के बारे में बताएंगे, और कैसे जलवायु परिवर्तन, जन आंदोलन और अलग अलग प्रकार के अन्याय आपने देखे हैं. तो आप अपने थोड़े प्रारंभिक विचार अगर हमें दे सकते हैं तो.
मेरा नाम कुमारी बाई जमकातन, और मैं तो कोरची में रहती हूँ. एक महाराष्ट्र के गढ़चिरोली जिला है, और वहां से फिर एक कोरची ब्लॉक है, तो मैं वही निवासी हूँ. और जो एक संस्था है आम्ही आमच्या आरोग्यासाठी संस्था करके, उस संस्था में मैं अभी 96 से कार्यकर्ती करके हूँ. और अभी जो हमारे कोरची ब्लॉक में 90 ग्राम सभाओं का एक महाग्राम सभा है, उस महाग्राम सभा में मैं पिछले साल से सह सचिव पद में काम संभाल रही हूँ. आम्ही आमच्या आरोग्यासाठी संस्था के तहत तो मैं महिला सक्षमीकरण की, इसमें मैं श्रम सहायता महिला समूह बनाने से उनको सक्षम करने का, रिकॉर्ड कीपिंग के बारे में है, महिलाओं के अधिकार के बारे में, इन सारी चीज को तो मैं काम करते के तहत में हम लोग जो 2017 से जो हम काम कर रहे हैं अभी कोरची ब्लॉक में, तो हमें अभी तक के यानी 75 जो ग्राम सभा है उनको सामुदायिक अधिकार पत्र मिला है. तो उसके तहत से हम अभी 2017 से, जैसे कि हिंदू पत्ता का जो लिलाव है, जो ठेकेदार और वन विभाग बैठकर करता था। इसलिए क्या है, पत्ता तोड़ने वाले जो मंजूरदार था, उनको ये मंजूरी के बारे में मालूम नहीं होता था। तो अभी हम वो ग्राम सभा के माध्यम से जब से हम तेंदुपत्ता का लिलाव पब्लिक और ठेकेदार आमने सामने बैठकर जब हम जाहिरात निकाल करके 90 ग्राम सभा एक जगह आकर के हम लिलाव कर रहे हैं, तो वहां से एक तो लोगों को उनको रोजी हमको कितना मिलेगा 100 कूड़ा का, और वहां से फिर हमको रॉयल्टी के पैसा कितना मिलेगा, ये सारी चीज यानी जो है वो मालूमात हो जाते हैं। तो वहां हम ज्यादा से महिलाओं का सहभाग बढ़ाने के लिए, ग्राम सभा तो है लेकिन वहां महिलाओं का रोल कहाँ है, उनका अधिकार क्या है। और तेंदुपत्ता के सीजन में तो महिलाओं को ही ज्यादा काम करना पड़ता है। सुबह साधारण 3 बजे से उठ करके तो रात में साधारण 9-10 बजे तक वो काम करती ही रहती है, और उस सीजन में साधारण उनको 2-3 घंटा ही आराम करने का समय मिलता है। तो उनका जो तकलीफ है वो ठेकेदार के सामने बताना, और जिस वजह से उनको अच्छे तरह से मजूरी मिलेंगे, तो उसमें महिलाओं का रोल हमारे यहाँ अच्छा दिखाई दे रहे हैं। दूसरे जो है कि हमारे यहाँ अभी जो सामुदायिक अधिकार पत्र जो मिला है, उस क्षेत्र का जो गौण वन उपज जो है उसका गांव में ही खरीदी कैसे कर सकते हैं, और अच्छा से जो मार्केट है वो हम कैसे देख सकते हैं कि जिसमें हमारे गांव के जो पैसा है वो गांव में ही खिलते रहे, और जो बाहर का जो साहूकार के पास जो आता है, तो वो साहूकार पद्धत जो है वो बंद होना चाहिए। गांव के पैसा गांव में मिलना चाहिए, और गरीब जो लोग हैं मजदूरदार, उनको सही समय में उनके जरूरत के समय में पैसा मिल सके। इस दृष्टि से हम लोग अभी ग्राम सभा के साथ काम कर रहे हैं। वहाँ अच्छे से महिलाओं का जो सहभाग है, जितना तो हम कहेंगे कि पूरा इसमें सभी महिलाएं हैं, सभी महिला बोलते हैं, सभी महिला निर्णय लेते हैं, ऐसे नहीं, लेकिन हम धीरे धीरे पायरी से हम ऊपर जा रहे हैं ताकि वो निर्णय प्रक्रिया तक कैसे पहुंच पाएंगे। तो इस तरह से हमारे यहाँ अभी वन अधिकार कानून के मुद्दे को लेकर के हमारे यहाँ काम नहीं चल रहा है। दूसरा जो है आदिवासी विभाग का जो वन धन योजना के तहत में हमारे यहाँ 8 ग्राम सभा के साथ में यानी वन धन केंद्र बना है, और उस केंद्र के तहत में इन सारी जो गौण वन उपज जो है खरीदी बिक्री का व्यवहार है, और ये सब अभी वन धन केंद्र के तहत में हो रहा है। वहाँ महिलाओं का अच्छा रोल दिख रहा है कि खरीदी में उनके सहभागिता है, जिसमें जो आर्थिक जो व्यवहार हो रहे हैं वहां पर पारदर्शक कैसे दिखेंगे, और जो आर्थिक व्यवहार हो रहा है वो महिलाओं को भी मालूम होना चाहिए कि उनका भी उतना ही अधिकार है ग्राम सभा में। तो जो आर्थिक व्यवहार हो रहा है वहां भी महिलाओं का सहभाग बढ़ाने हेतु हम वहां काम कर रहे हैं। उनके नेतृत्व विकास करने हेतु हम प्रशिक्षण दे रहे हैं, उनको समता विकास के दृष्टि से हम प्रशिक्षण दे रहे हैं, और एक टोटल यानी रिकॉर्ड कीपिंग के बारे में मैं खुद ही ट्रेनिंग दे रही हूँ ताकि वो रिकॉर्ड अच्छे से रख सके, और ऑडिट करके खुद की यानी ग्राम सभा का खुद के वन धन केंद्र का ऑडिट खुद करे, और जो व्यवहार होता है वो सभी को दिख पाए, जैसा है वैसा ही दिखना चाहिए, कहीं त्रुटि कहीं गलत ना हो। जिसके लिए से हम महिलाओं को एक सक्षम बनाने का जो काम है वो हम कर रहे हैं।
धन्यवाद कुमारी बाई। Mayalmit, could I invite you to please share your initial comments and introduction?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mayalmit Lipja, and I'm working to protect my homeland, Zongu, for as long as I can remember. And I basically work with that voluntary. I'm working with the 2 organizations. The first is the Affected Citizen of Tista, ACT, and I've been fighting over the 14 years against onslaught, large run of the river dams in Zongu and other parts of Sikkim. In addition, I am passionate about keeping the lecture culture and tradition alive and passing them on to the future generation of young lecturers. I am also the president of Sikkim Indigenous Lecture Tribal Association, SILTA, and regularly organize events and programs for young lecturers. I especially encourages young lecture women to take more active role in leadership whenever they may be. And what this basically the ACT what we have doing is like we've been doing awareness program to each and every villages in Zongu and other parts of Sikkim. The firstly we did this we talk about the impact of the mega dams, and we have given awareness to each and every, like the people in Zongo regarding the Forest Right Act. With that, with the awareness, with the effort of the ECT, uh, we had a Gram Sabha in 2018, that um, and in that Gram Sabha 99% have rejected the this what you call yeah, FRA, that clearance. So NSPC, they could not get the clearance because the almost whole 8 GPU from from Zongo, entire Zongo people, 99% people have rejected the clearance. But problem in Zongo is what happened. We have a left bank and right bank. The left bank is outside Zongo, so there 100% they give the clearance for this forest right back. So this is what, like the struggling that we have been doing. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is, like, basically my experience, because I had with this movement I had to drop my colleges. I couldn't continue my college. I was when in ACT we were very little the women in the executive board, but I have noticed that the voices of women was not there. So this is how I wanted the SILTA to be formed. Basically the objective, and this SILTA is now empowering the self-help group, the women folk in the village, especially in Zongo now. And we are working continuously with international rivers. Even in COVID, now we could organize webinar, and we could work on to rivers and women. So with this initiative, with this, now the women's of Zongo has become very strong, and now they are very vocal. They speak up. They come up with different points of the impact of the hydro dams. And even if there is a meeting before COVID, like people, like whenever I have to call the president of that women today, so before 2-3 days, they just cut the order, they'll finish the work, and they don't want each and every woman, they don't miss the meetings that we conduct. So these are the seriousness, and these are the initiatives that the women's of Zongos are, like, they are doing. So I'll talk about more in coming session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayurmit. Thank you everyone for sharing your initial thoughts and your introductions. I will now be posing more pointed questions to each panelist here. सबसे मैं 2 से 3 विशिष्ट सवाल पूछूंगी और आपसे गुजारिश करूंगी कि आप उनका आंसर दीजिए. I will be posing, like I said, some pointed questions, and I request you to share answers to the pointed questions. कुमारी भाई, मैं आपसे शुरू करती हूँ और 5 मिनट सबके पास रहेंगे इस राउंड में. तो गच्चीरोली में अगर आप हमें बता सकते हैं कि लोग और समुदाय वनों के साथ क्या संबंध रखते हैं, कैसे उनकी रक्षा करते हैं, और कैसे जलवायु परिवर्तन से आपने, आपके समुदाय ने, आपके वनों ने क्या असर और क्या अन्याय देखे हैं. अगर आप थोड़ा सा हमें इसके बारे में बता सकते हैं. धन्यवाद.
जी, तो हम गढ़चिरौली जिला में हम वनों के साथ में जो हमारा जो ये संबंध जो जुड़ा हुआ है, उसके बारे में मैं कहना चाहूंगी कि जैसे कि हमारे यहाँ जो जितना भी हमारे उपजीविका का जो साधन है, वो हमारे खेती है और उसके साथ में यानी जंगल है. तो ये दोनों हैं हमारे जीने के लिए जो सहारा है. तो खेती तो बहुत कम है कि एक बार हम धान का जो फसल है वो काट लिए तो वहां से और दूसरा फसल नहीं मिलेगा. लेकिन जंगल एक ऐसा है चीज है कि वहां से हमें 12 महीना में भी हम जो जंगल जाएंगे तो वहां से हम खाली हाथ नहीं आएंगे. एक हम और रोज का जो संबंध है जो जंगल से, तो महिलाओं का ज्यादा है. रोज उनको पान भी लगेगा, फूल भी लगेगा, झाड़ भी लगेगा, झाड़नी भी लगेगा, दातून भी लगेगा, दवाई भी लगेगा, कंदमूल भी लगेगा. तो रोज का जो संबंध है वो ज्यादा से ज्यादा महिलाओं का जल जंगल जमीन से जुड़े हुए उनका संबंध है, जो हम उनको एक माहिर घर बोलते हैं, मायके जो बोलते हैं. हम जो मायके में अगर जाते हैं माँ बाप के यहाँ और कोई भी चीज हमको जरूरत जो लगती है, वो चीज हम वहां से उठा के लाते हैं, उसी तरह ही हम जंगल को भी अपने मायके समझते हैं यहाँ। तो ये यहाँ का जो संबंध इतना जुड़ा हुआ है कि हर चीज से वो हमारे संस्कृति से जुड़ा हुआ है, हमारे परंपरा से जुड़ा हुआ है, और हमारे उपजीविका के साधन से भी वो हमारे सामाजिक इसमें भी वो जुड़ा है। क्योंकि समाज में अगर हमें किसी के यहाँ शादी है तो वहां से हमको लकड़ी लाना पड़ता है, पान लाना पड़ता है, फूल भी लाना पड़ता है। तो ये है। और संस्कृति में भी हम हमेशा जब जब भी हम त्योहार मानेंगे, उस समय अनेक जरूरत के अनुसार में हम मुहा का झाड़ है, चार का झाड़ है, आंवला का है, तो ऐसे हमारे जो संस्कृति में भी वो जुड़ी हुई है कि हमारे जो जरूरत से उस चीज को हम लाते हैं। तो इस तरह से इसका जो जंगल और जो हमारे जो संबंध है वो हम पूर्व पहले से, वन अधिकार कानून तो अभी 2006 में आ गए हैं, लेकिन वहां जो बोल रहे हैं कि अनुसूचित जाति जमाती और पारंपरिक, जो बहुत पहले से उस गांव में बैठे हुए जितना हमारे समुदाय है उनको जो जंगल का जो अधिकार मिला है, तो सिर्फ वहां से कुछ खाना है, लाना है, इतना ही नहीं मर्यादा रहा, तो उस जंगल को बचाने का जिम्मेदारी भी हमारे ही हाथ में है। तो वो अगर जंगल बचाना है तो वो कैसे बचेगा? तो वो ग्राम सभा ने कुछ नियमावली बनाया है। नियमावली में वो 5 घर 6 घर का ऐसे कुछ कमेटी बना करके हर रोज वो जंगल गश्ती करने के लिए जाता है, और वो फिर वहाँ एक रजिस्टर रखते हैं, और रजिस्टर में वहाँ नोंद करते हैं कि आज के दिन में कौन कौन गए थे, कल जाएंगे वो लोग अपने हाजिरी लगाएंगे। इस तरह से वो उस रजिस्टर में भी नोंदनी होता है। और दूसरा जो बात है कि ग्राम सभा अगर व्यवस्थापन का अगर काम देख रहे हैं तो जंगल बहुत बड़े हैं, लेकिन वहाँ कुछ ऐसे जगह है कि वहाँ जंगल अभी पूरी तरह से नष्ट हो चुके हैं। तो वहाँ क्या करना चाहिए? तो वहाँ यानी अपने को जिस जरूरत है जिसमें उत्पादन भी हमें मिल सके, हमारा गर्जा भी पूरा हो सके, इस तरह से जो झाड़ है वो झाड़ लगाने का जो काम है वो ग्राम सभा कर रहे हैं, ताकि हमारे आने वाली पीढ़ी के लिए भी वो जंगल बच के रहे। इस तरह से हमारे यहाँ भी ग्राम सभा वो काम कर रहे हैं। धूपकला में जंगल में आग भी लगा देते हैं, कोई रास्ते से चलने वाले या मुँह चुनने के लिए जाते हैं, वो लोग थोड़ा आग लगा देते हैं, छोड़ देते हैं, उसके लिए वो जंगल में आग भी लग जाते हैं। तो इसके लिए भी आज ग्राम सभा वो गश्ती करते हैं, अपने अपने जंगल में वो लोग घूमते हैं, और अगर कहीं उनको जलते हुआ देखा तो वो जंगल को बुझाने के लिए प्रयास कर रहे हैं। और हमारे जो कोरची ब्लॉक है, वहाँ जो हमारा 13 जो ग्राम सभा है, उनको जंगल का कार्य आयोजन तैयार करने के लिए हमने आदिवासी विभाग से जैसे को फंड मांगा है। वहाँ ग्राम सभा का सारी गांव फेरी अगर निकाले हैं। ठीक
नहीं, आप अपना पूरा कंप्लीट कर सकते हैं।
हाँ,
आप पूरा कंप्लीट कर
ठीक। तो पूरा कर लूं।
हाँ जी, हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
तो वो जो है आदिवासी विभाग से जो अनुदान रकम जो मांगे हैं, और उसके तहत में फिर उन्हें पूरा गांव के जो कार्य योजना तैयार कर रहे हैं, वहाँ की शिक्षा की व्यवस्था कैसा है, रोजगार की व्यवस्था कैसा है, और फिर महिला अधिकार के क्षेत्र में क्या कमियां हैं, उनको क्या शिक्षण देने का जरूरत पड़ रही है, और एक गांव का सवाल क्या है, जंगल में किस किस प्रकार के झाड़ है, वो सब यानी सीमांकन करके वो पूरा कार्य योजना तैयार करने के लिए वो अभी ग्राम सभा वो काम कर रहे हैं। वहां हम लोग युवा लोगों को सामने लाने का प्रयास किए हैं, ताकि वो अगले पीढ़ी को वो लोग पढ़ाएंगे। इस तरह से हमारे यहाँ काम चल रहा है।
थैंक यू कुमारी भाई। तो युवा और महिलाओं के साधन से हम कैसे अपने इन्वायरमेंट को भी प्रिजर्व कर सकते हैं, ये आपने बताया। थैंक यू। Mailmit, I'll pose the similar questions to you. I've read extensively about how the Letra community has a very spiritual, cultural relationship with the Teesta River. So if you could elaborate a little about that for us. Also, you spoke about women upliftment through your movement. So more generically, what are your thoughts on the relationship between women upliftment and environmental preservation. If we talk specifically about rivers and forests, can one happen without the other, or do, or are both ways to actually uplift, preservation of each other? If you could share your thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Basically, lectures are indigenous. They are animist, and the lectures now they have been converted to Christians and now this lectures have been converted to Christians and Buddhism, but mainly the people who is Buddhist and even Christians, they have this the animism still continuing. Like people, most of the people of Zongu, we still worship river this Mount Kanchenjunga and River Tista and Rongit. But the River Rongyong, which is one of the tributaries of River Tista, is the most sacred river for the Lipcha community because we believe that after we die, our soul travel back to this River Rongyong, and it goes to the foothills of Mount Kanchenjunga, where we believe that it's a Pumzu land. Pumzu land is where our soul go and rest after we die. Even we believe that our ancestors, we don't believe that heaven and hell, and what we believe that after we die, our soul travel back to this River Rongyong and goes to the foothills of Mount Kanchenjunga. That is why this River Rongyong is very, very sacred and very, very important for lecture community. And what has happened right now in Sikkim that we have more than 30 mega dams, and this in River Rongyong, there's a Panang project of 320 megawatts. And if this the project comes out, the entire River Rongyong will be diverted into the tunnel. So that is directly is a threat to the religious point of view. And when you're talking about this women and how it works, I think it's a. I think the more this climate change, the environment impact about these dams, I think the most vulnerable impact is on the women and children. So I think and it's very very important for the women to know about their rights and even they should know about the environment, importance of the environment. And what is happening with the this coming of mega dams in our region is like the springs water, they are started drying up very rapidly, and even people like we are mostly agriculture people. People have stopped doing paddy field because there is a shortage of water. Even in monsoon, the small spring water are not like it's drying up. The small streams are slowly it's decreasing, So and even like the decreasing of snowfall is like it is happening. So there is a drastic change in the climate, So with this, I think, and even in the decision making, like now in Sikkim is the last for the eight in the whole of Sikkim. Now we have a small stretch like 8 to 10 kilometers of river in Songu, where in the small river there's a 510 megawatts the dams is coming up. If this becomes a reality in Sikkim, we will not see any free flowing river in whole of Sikkim, So, and what is the ECT demanding to the central government, to the state government, is that please leave this small stretch of 8 to 10 kilometers of river as a river sanctuary, And recently, the government declared the local name is a fish called katle. They have declared this fish as a state fish, okay? But now we are telling to the government that if you are declaring this fish as a state fish, but first they should, they should say we should have the river of them coming up in Sikkim. It's it's a since Sikkim is a like it falls in the it's a in the Himalayan eastern Himalayan, which is a very young mountains, and since the Sikkim falls in the seismic zone, so I think it's not feasible to have continuously more than 30 dams, what we feel. And other burden that we are facing in Sikkim is like we have more than 20 of pharmaceutical companies coming up in Sikkim. It's like coming up mushroom. Nobody is checking. Not a single soul in Sikkim are raising voice against the pharmaceutical company in Sikkim. And these companies are built at the banks of River Tista and River Rangit. The pollutions are there. and no, we have a state board, but I don't think so they are really working on it. So we have a few, we have a few members in ECT. We are trying to not only mobilize Azongo people, we are trying to mobilize other people across the state. And we are now started. It's been 4 years that we've been started our campaigning this of free flowing rivers wherever the small streams, because now government is not sparing the small streams. We have a major mega dams in the main tributaries of River Tista and Rangit. Even to the tributaries, they are coming up with a small mega this 95, 93, 60, these megawatts of. So we are trying to we are trying to raise these issues across the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melvin. Anilji, I'd now like to invite you. So you spoke about working with a lot of movements, right? I'd like to ask you, what are some trends you're seeing in today's movements? One of the key questions that the conference brings out is, are today's movements radical enough, big enough to get to climate justice, right? So are they, I would ask you, do you think movements today are radical enough? Do you think they can be more radical? How can they be more radical? And also, if you could a little bit talk about extractive and neoliberal policies of the state and how they are keeping India from preserving its commons. So if you could, share about both of these two things. Thank you.
Okay, that's quite a massive, very complicated question. And in my limited understanding about an engagement with movements, definitely we have seen some kind of a change happening. Some kind of a change happening. I won't say it's a radical shift or not, but one of the important change, at least within the forest rights movements, which one has seen, is about the community leadership coming up. When I say this one with the implementation of Forest Rights Act, when many of the organizations, many of the movements were actually figuring out, trying to the act will how will the act be implemented in its spirit that way. So I think one of the important movements that ways, which I'm quoting right now, is the All India Union of Forest Working People, which was formerly known as the National Forum of Forest Working People at one point of time. Then they changed themselves into a union. A large, at least in the last 10 years, what I'm seeing is that the thought process of the movement to actually change into a union with the community leadership, especially community leadership with a focus on women. So the articulations of a Sukalodi or a Rani ji or Matai Dayal ji or Munilal ji for that matter comes very much forefront and very much powerful based on their experience and the engagement and the disengagement with the law enforcers and the lawmakers. So when the forest rights, when you know that two of the important amendments that were coming in, they were bringing in Indian Forest Rights Act amendment. So these are the two women. I think it's Sukalo Didi as well as Rajalakshmi Didi who are two of the petitioners in the Supreme Court regarding that no eviction should happen based on the current amendments which are brought in Bolkar. Now there is a Supreme Court decision where many of the civil society organizations, members, and all have joined in that petition also. So that's still going in the Supreme Court. So that is one thing. What one important thing which are happening in the movements. But I won't say that about every movement. Every movement has its own contradictions, its own stagnation, its own peak levels and low levels. But another important thing, it's the amount of youngsters who are coming on the streets also. That is an important, interesting thing which we are seeing in the last 3, 4, 5 years. The amount of collectives which are come out, which might have some understanding about, they might not be politically very, 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 I wouldn't say politically very right or, politically very sharp at that level, but their engagement of actually wanting to see some kind of a positive transformational change is very much heartening in my opinion. In certain things which I have myself with my colleagues initiated something known as the Youth for the Coast, where we have seen, generally we were thinking that more and more movement, it's just an experimental, more and more movement, um, youngsters would come in and actually in a way actually to try to see whether there can be a second level leadership or a third level leadership of a perspective building kind of a thing germinate. So these are all things which are happening on the ground, and this can be seen across India. And definitely I see all this, whether it's the farmers movement, see that whether it's Shaheen Bagh movement for that matter, because the farmers movement, though the demands are different, the point is that the model which they have used is that from the Shaheen Bagh women's strategy. If you very clearly see how do they actually mobilize themselves and keep themselves, and determined not to leave without their demands saying yes. On the other hand, in the COVID period also, the government is running its own business. It's as if nothing has happened. Things are going on full swing. We are getting reports from Odisha. There is this public hearing which has been stopped by the people day before yesterday. But it's business for the governments. And one of the things which I'm very worried about is the false solutions which have been propagated in the name of green economy. You just change the name, right? Green solutions, blue solutions. You just change it, and then you have the corporates itself bringing with the solutions. The fundamental thing about people losing their land, people losing their livelihood, people losing their basic source of existence is something which is fundamentally a problem. If any solutions or any alternatives are excluding people, the environment, the other organisms, and living on that situation, in that space, it's definitely a crime. And I think there should be something known as a commons manifesto which needs to come in the days to come, and that needs to be pitched in forward, is what I would say. So I'll stop here at this point of time. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you so much, Anilji. So I think JSUG has dropped off. Maybe it's some internet issue. I will pose my questions to Rajni ji in that case. So Rajni ji, as you alluded to earlier about this paradoxical tragedy, trends that exist that we have no control over, that are causing climate change. Could you share more about that? And where do you see, you write extensively about movements. So, where do you see movements such as the one sparked by JSUG, Mayalmith, Kumari Bai? Where do you see them fit in, right? What are ways, and like you also very provocatively said, what are ways for India to survive, thrive, and embrace alternatives? So some big questions, but feel free to, pick what you'd like. I'm just picking up from what you shared because all of that is really provocative. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So firstly, and this came to me as I was listening to all our friends and colleagues, that when we are talking about the life and the action of the communities on the ground, especially in this part of the world, basically broadly the tropical belt and a little further north, which is going to be and is already being the worst affected, I really don't think climate justice is an appropriate term. Okay, justice has to be done by the people who have run the systems. It has to be done by those systems that have brought the world to this point. So, for communities in these parts of the planet, it is only about climate survival and adjustment and scrambling to somehow, hold life together in some semblance of stability. I will not even say normalcy. So therefore, I'm almost like placing an objection to the term climate justice being applied to communities on the ground. Now let's look at this. What I'll do here is I'll very quickly try to locate what that larger issue is. So the first thing to remember, and I know everybody in this forum already knows it, but it is such a famous and quotable quote: nature bats last and it owns the stadium. Okay, this is from Paul Hawken and Emery Lovins, their book on natural capitalism. Now, this has been known to the people who are running the macro global systems for at least 28, 29 years. This has been kind of broadly recognized, whether or not people have taken action on it. So we have to look at the question of commons in this context, that we know where the responsibility for the current really existential crisis rests. And I want to make it very clear that here I'm referring to the global north. Okay, you and I'm certainly part of the global north, given the comforts I live in. At the same time, politically, I have a choice to align myself either with the global north or the global south. And aligning yourself with the global north means that you buy into a view of the commons, which is actually erroneous. So quickly, I wanted to just place on the record here that the commons have been in disgrace in the West, at least through the 60s and 70s, since a famous essay by a man called Garrett Hardin was written, called Tragedy of the Commons. Basically, to cut a long story short, it argued that, oh, you know, Hindi mein hum use kehte hain na, Sanja baap koi na roye. That which belongs to everybody belongs to no one, and therefore it suffers. Well, that is historically untrue. Even today, after the onslaught of so much celebration of greed and conversion of life into commodity, we still have surviving systems which are social, they are cultural, they are religious, systems that are nurturing and holding together the commons. Why? Why is this happening in all those parts of the world which have been highly developed long before the word development became fashionable or modernity arrived on this planet? It is because all societies that moved beyond the hunting and gathering, which means basically last 3,000 years of experience for much of the world, all societies that went beyond hunting and gathering have known that the commons is what you need to sustain life. And that commons are the pond in which the fish of private property can swim. So if you don't have the commons, actually in a short or to medium term, you won't even have private property, simply because nothing will survive. And nothing demonstrates that more than the climate crisis. Now, rhetorically, the global discourse, the mainstream global discourse is, yes, of course, it is saying that, oh, climate is the final commons. But we are trying to solve the whole problem through the market mechanism. And when it comes to the communities on the ground, all our colleagues who have spoken today, you know, we look for fancy or technologically sophisticated or basically solutions that to me more and more look like moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. Okay, and I mean the Titanic after it has hit the iceberg. So now to come back to, you know, what do we do? One, because, and I'm saying all this deliberately on the assumption that, you know, this, what we are working on today, what we are recording today is going to a global audience. One is that we need to recognize the efforts of communities in their own terms, not judge them, you know, by terminologies and criteria of measurement that make more sense at the macro level. This will mean that we will have to distinguish between creating value that generates and regenerates and nurtures life in multiple forms of life. We will have to distinguish that value as well-being, let me put it that way, from value as asset that is monetizable. This is the crux. And so many communities will have to resolve this dilemma. There will be a great temptation. There will be great pressure to equate climate action with monetization, because communities will be told, oh, that which can't be measured can't be saved because it cannot be valued. And whatever is measured, money is the most, you know, reliable benchmark for that measure. So this is the choice that I think communities are going to be faced with. Will we accept this because this is the language that, you know, supposedly makes sense? in the global discourse, whether it is the SDG one. This is not just about Wall Street. To a large extent, I suspect even the SDG framework. I must confess, I'm not an expert on SDGs or anything, but whatever I see about it gives me this feeling that its fundamental understanding is still within that frame, that what you can measure, what you can reduce to a number, you can value and value in monetary terms. Well, if that is the case, then I think we should all just party very hard and, forget even talking about survival. But I can't end on that very negative note. So I'll close by giving you an illustration, since I mentioned the SDGs. So the UNEP did a handbook for policymakers on sustainable production and consumption. And on the cover of that, it's a, sort of a large size booklet. On the cover of that, you can all go and find it on the internet. You will get a PDF. There is a photo of an Indian, probably Assamese or Meghalaya, northeastern woman, spinning on a charkha, sitting on a straw mat, and you can see behind her, her handloom fabrics are, hanging on the wall. Now, this, and I don't have time to go into details why that is they've chosen the right image to symbolize sustainability. But the entire content of the book reduces that picture to an empty artifact. So these are the harsh choices I feel that, communities will have to make. And I think in this, it may be wise to consider flipping the old mantra. What is the old mantra? Think globally, act locally. No, maybe we need to think locally and then send that message out to the global. Thanks.
Thank you, Rajni ji. I'll invite Jesu ji. Thank you, Jesu ji, for rejoining. That must have been a technical or network issue. So I'll just pose a question to you, and you can answer that, picking up from your introductory comments on redefining global commons, and specifically the sea, and how you mentioned that there are some gaps that exist there, right? So are you seeing some steps being taken that will help us redefine the sea as our commons? Or if not, what are those steps that you think we could take today to really redefine how the sea is the commons?
Yeah. As so far, there is no, as far as the resource fishers as the resource dependent communities on coast and sea, there is no definition of commons. There where they have used the sea, they had the traditional knowledge, and they used this sea for fishing with different customary practices, governance practices among themselves, which was really sustainable. They were not greedy to say. They were all the technology were introduced from the year 1962 onwards, the Norwegian technology in fishing and the different technologies, and they were pushed to the technology and move away from their sustainable practices. Now they are pointed as they are destroying the ecology, they are destroying the sea. Okay, this is on one hand. How to the climate change in itself, even now after this 2021 report, it talks of cities being drowned. Mumbai is drowning, Chennai is drowning, and no one talks of the entire coast where the coastal fishers are affected by different disasters, repeated cyclones, and they are thrown away like anything in many places. and that is not at all even more important. Only the urban area being more and more eroded, more and even in internationally speaking, Jakarta, they say singing Jakarta in Indonesia. So that is how the language itself is framed when you talk of climate change. Now, coming when you talk of sea as a commons, if you want really to be the community to have access and control over the resource dependent fisher communities to have, then we have to redefine it. Now it is not, it is being the other way defined, like marine space. We are going in for marine spatial planning for accommodating all the 13 defined components of blue economy. And when we plan like that, there is a space for really the resource dependent fishers. Then how do we define the fishers' rights? So that is a big question before us. And now in this, we can really think of one thing. The what is it? When we're talking of the initial talks, we were mentioning of the voices of the traditional land communities as well as fisher communities are not heard in the global context of climate change. So where is the representation? First, we have to think of representation. What are our voices? How do we make our voices heard? That is one thing. Representation, recognition that we are the resource dependent communities on the sea. Where is that recognition? Small scale fishers. Recognition is told already. Small scale fishers are invisible, and now women are more invisible. Again and again, in this whole context of defining the blue economy and the different policies in all over the world, women don't have any space at all. Their space are more and more, they are displaced and they are becoming more and more invisible. Their economy is not considered, and so sea is more and more commodified. Sea resources are commodified, sea itself is commodified. If it becomes a commodity, then what is the question? So, yeah, then we have to think of another thing, the representation, recognition, and redistribution. What are we going to redistribute or ensure the rights of the coast and fishers who are resource dependent on the sea resources? How are we going to redefine and allocate them, or restructuring everything? So these are the areas where we have to work. Otherwise, then think of linking climate change and to the shore. So that is the main thing. Not building walls, and that's not going to solve the issue. It's more and more going to create problems for the fishers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JSOG. That's quite a mantra: representation, recognition, redistribution. Thank you for sharing. So thank you all. That concludes the second round of comments from all of you, and we'll now be moving into the last concluding round, where I'd invite all of you to share. Just, you heard everyone talk, and now it's time for us to kind of wrap up with what next, right? How do you suggest that in our current structures, our current realities of capitalism, like Rajni pointed, where everything is put to a number, where extraction is the way we survive, what steps must we take? What steps can we take? And what can India take from and give to the world with respect to preservation of global commons? So I'll invite Mayalmit to please share, your final thoughts, and maybe wrap up in about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's high time to, like, everybody should be very serious about this climate change, and I think the decision makers should really listen to the grassroots level people, because what I feel regarding this development activities or project, whatever, I think the first thing that the government should think is like what these people want, what type of development they want. In Sikkim, what is happening is the government are imposing on the indigenous people, forcefully, and if you see regarding the Lecture people, like constitutionally, like we have been protected under laws, and constitutionally our lands cannot be bought by the Nepalese or Sikkimese origin also. There is a restriction because of revenue order number 1. So when, and there's a contradicting, like youngsters like us, like the laws, prohibits transfer of land of indigenous people to the non-indigenous people. But in the same time, in the name of development, they are grabbing so many lands. And what is happening with, like, there is no false promises. There's no resettlement, no rehabilitation, and we are having a continuously landslides. The one of the incident I wanted to share in this forum is, like, in 2013, August 2016, we had a massive landslide in the one of the tributaries of River Rongyong. Till today, it's been 5 years. So almost 20 to 25, the house was submerged. The bridge are submerged. Now it has formed, or in the tributaries has formed an artificial lake. So till today, the government has failed to make this bridge, and 12 to 13 villages are cut off from the rest of the world. And a lot of the ANC mothers, a lot of like children are really suffering because the connectivity is so bad, and there is so bad, the health sector. There is inadequate of medicines. These, when we talk about this climate change, these are the things. It's like we are in the ground level, we are witnessing. And when we are trying to, tell to the government that we don't want such, we need development. Every individual, every society, every government, every country, they want to go, but not at the cost of the people, not at the cost of indigenous people. So, and what is happening in Sikkim and other in the world? We're having a press conference, we're having a webinars, we talk about so much, but in reality, nothing works like that. So I have, like, nothing important to comment on this point.
Thank you, Mel. Jesu ji, may I invite you to share your concluding remarks?
Yeah, see, various people rightly pointed out. Our traditional knowledge, our traditional wisdom has to be considered, because we had a good system of governance and practices which are sustainable. And taking away all, now we are pushed to a verge of displacement, and even we are becoming an expendable commodity, I should say. Climate change and disasters are eroding our lives, property, and identities in a very rigorous way in the last decades, especially the fishers, because we are living on the coast. Even though the IPCC had come up with a series of special report on the ocean and the cryosphere in a changing climate in 2019, and other reports, including recent AR6, technically highly evident the disappearance of our homelands. That shows that our homelands are disappearing, coast is disappearing. But so-called climate reports largely talk of carbon emissions and others. They only use ocean to threat the world without addressing our disappearance. We are disappearing, but they are not. They are making the world threaten. They threaten the world without even addressing our question of disappearance. So we should change our mindset. It is high time that coast is enclosed and engulfed by the blue economy projects. That one has to understand. Climate change and disasters to highlight our perspectives and come up with united front to put forth ecology as an ecological integrity to secure and assert fishers common in order to be aware that the entire land-based community that the fishers are not expendable commodities of climate change as well as disasters. So we are slowly becoming, we are not in the, what to say, we are invisibilized, we are becoming more and more, we are displaced, and we are becoming expendable. We are, or more or less external. They think that in the terms of economy, we are expendable commodity. That cannot be the way. We are facing repeated disasters, and we are at the verge of, we are more vulnerable, but we are a resource dependent commodity of the ocean. So that has to be taken in mind, the mindset of the policymakers We have to talk to them, negotiate with them, or influence them, whatever. That has to be the way we have to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JCG. Anil, may I please invite you to share your concluding remarks?
So, couple of things. I think this is not something which is affecting only the global south. It's going to affect the global north also. So, I'm sure that if we have looking at different struggles on the ground, be it in the global north or in the global south, some kind of an international solidarity and holding hands is very much important. And there are lessons one can learn from each other also, which needs to be shared with each other, and especially there are lessons to be learned when a fascist government is in power, because that's one of the important lessons which we will have to take in and learn from it very clearly, and that is where that kind of a solidarity in terms of ideology, solidarity in terms of strategies, solidarity in terms of resources, all these are for me are very important things which needs to take forward. And uh, without a give and take relationship, be with the nature, be with each other, nothing is possible. There is this for when you have this word commons. I have read this article somewhere earlier by it's written by Nityanand Jayaraman as well as T.M. Krishna, where they actually say that in medieval Tamil there is this word known as Purambok, and there is a song also on this one. Purambok is this place which is open, which adds value to the entire land. It needs to be kept open. It needs to be preserved. It needs to be under strict legislation. It cannot be owned by anyone. It is for all. So within the territorial land as well as the dynamic sea oceans, there needs to be space which is open for all and which can be preserved for all, and which should have that kind of a vision. That kind of alternative futures are more important over here. Therefore, every project or proposal therefore by the government, in order to actually usurp this kind of an open space which is commons, which is needed for the nature, which needed for the animals, which is needed for the human beings, needs to be resisted in all its might, and that kind of a resistance is absolutely needed. And that resistance can be only taken forward by the communities who are dependent on the nature, where they look not only after themselves but only keep nature as the center of the discourse. Thanks.
थैंक यू अनिल जी. कुमारी भाई, मैं आपको बुलाना चाहूंगी. तो हम अब सब अपनी समापन टिप्पणियां दे रहे हैं, तो आप हमें बता सकते हैं कि आपको आपके हिसाब से भारत से दुनिया भर को क्या सीख मिल सकती है, और आज के समय में संरचनाओं में, नीतियों में आपको कैसे लगता है कि हम अपने वनों की, आदिवासियों की और रक्षा कर सकते हैं?
रक्षा के बारे में?
हाँ जी.
एक बार बताइए.
हाँ जी, फिर से बताऊं? हाँ जी. हाँ. मैं भारत से दुनिया भर को क्या सीख मिल सकती है, जैसे आप काम करते हैं दुनिया भर में, हम क्या सीख दे सकते हैं, एक प्रश्न ये है. और दूसरा ये है कि आज के समय में, आज की संरचनाओं में, आज की नीतियों में कैसे हम अपने वनों की और आदिवासियों की और रक्षा कर सकते हैं.
कर सकते हैं जी. तो ये एक तो है कि हम जो जंगल के जो रक्षण जो कर रहे हैं, तो वहाँ हमको एक दिक्कत आ रहे हैं कि जो भी वन अधिकार कानून 2006 के तहत में पूरा गांव की जो अधिकार है, तो ग्राम सभा को जो पावर तो दिया है, लेकिन सरकार का जो ये है उनका जो विश्वास नहीं बन रहा है कि ये जो ग्राम सभा को पूरा अधिकार अगर दे दिए तो हमारे सरकार का रोल कहाँ रहेंगे. तो इस चीज को यानी सरकार मानने के लिए एक तो तैयार नहीं है. उसके लिए कुछ यानी अपने को सीखना पड़ेगा. और दूसरा यही सरकार के तहत में कि जितने भी हमारे जो सामुदायिक अधिकार क्षेत्र जो मिला है, वहां से अभी अगर सरकार जो है, अभी जैसे हमारे यहाँ झंडे पार्क का जो है वहां का लोहा है, तो वो लोहा निकालने के लिए किसी कंपनी को खनिज के लिए लीज देने के लिए प्रस्ताव जारी किया है. लेकिन हम 2009 से हम पूरा कोरची ब्लॉक के जो 130 गांव हैं वो सारी एक जगह आकर के इस चीज को विरोध कर रहे हैं कि अगर एक बार खनिज हो गया तो हमारे जो बच्चे हैं उनके शिक्षा में परिणाम होगा, महिलाओं के ऊपर अत्याचार का परिणाम बढ़ जाएगा, हमको शुद्ध हवा नहीं मिलेगा, पानी नहीं मिलेगा, हमारे खेती नष्ट हो जाएगा, हमारे देवी दुर्गा है उनकी जो संस्कृति भी नष्ट हो जाएगा। तो ये सारी चीज को तो 2009 से हम बचाते आ रहे हैं एक संगठन के तहत में, फिर भी इस चीज के लिए और डर है कि सरकार भी उसके पीछे लगा ही है कि किसी व्यक्ति को पैसे देकर आमिष दिखाने का जो काम है, पैसे ले लो यार, वहां काम शुरू होने दो, अपने बेरोजगार जो बच्चे हैं उनको का रोजगार मिलेगा। तो इस तरह के जो चीज है तो उसके लिए भी हम जैसे कि ग्राम सभा के स्तर पे ही हम ये कर नहीं पाएंगे, तो उसके लिए जिला है और अपने राज्य है, देश के स्तर में भी इसके लिए कहीं तो भी आवाज उठना चाहिए कि ये जो है इन सारे हमारे दुनिया भर में इस चीज चल रहा है कि खनिज के बारे में। हमारे यहाँ गढ़चिरौली में एक और है सुरजागढ़ प्रकल्प। तो ये चीज तो है, और इसके साथ साथ में जैसे कि अभी का जो राजनीति है, राजनीति क्षेत्र में तो पूरा ही ग्राम सभा का विरोध है, क्योंकि उनको अपने मन से काम करने के लिए उनको जगह नहीं मिल पा रहा है, क्योंकि ग्राम सभा एक जगह आकर के जो न्याय कर ले रहा है, व्यवस्था बना रहा है, वो कहाँ कैसे क्यों करेंगे इस सारी चीज का जो व्यवस्था कर रहे हैं। तो ये राजनीति पक्ष को भी ये चीज का मान्यता नहीं है, क्योंकि उनको मनमानी करना नहीं मिल रहा है। तो ये भी हमारे लिए दिक्कत की जगह है कि इनके साथ में हम कैसे सामना करके हम अपने जंगल की व्यवस्थापन करेंगे और उसको अच्छा से हम और उनका जो कार्य योजन है वो हम कर पाएंगे। तो ये सारे चीज है जो हमें दुनिया भर से और सीखने की जरूरतें लग रहे हैं। हमारे संस्कृति को भी कभी धीरे धीरे नष्ट होते जा रहे हैं, तो वो भी हमें सीखना है।
थैंक यू कुमारी जी, हमें बहुत सीखना है, पर मुझे लगता है कि आपके काम से दुनिया को भी बहुत सीखना है। हाँ जी,
हाँ जी,
रजनी जी, मैं प्लीज इनवाइट यू टू शेयर कंक्लूडिंग रिमार्क्स।
Okay, I'll say it in English. See, this we must protect and live with nature in harmony. This part has been well established by our fellow panelists. I think what I would emphasize is that actual well-being should be the criteria. Trans-species and trans-generational. Because there will be many technologies, many management techniques which will be pushed upon communities in order to save water or improve the water, or in boxes and in silos, and I think that will be very dangerous. So from our side, those of us who live in the first world, so-called, or who are part of the global north, I think our duty is to fight and to change the current notion of growth and development. Because as long as we are living within the dominant paradigm of growth, which is endless growth, perpetual growth of the economy, not of nature systems, not of ecosystems, and we must contend with the harsh reality of ratios. That is something we've actually not talked about, and that is maybe for another session, that there are certain dilemmas and certain elements of our crisis which have to do with the people to rest of nature ratio. But I would close by saying that let us pay closer attention to the degrowth discourse. And it is very significant that the Indian term, see, in Latin America, the equivalent of degrowth is buen vivir, the good life. In Africa, the equivalent of degrowth is Ubuntu, which means you are, therefore I am. And in India, or at least in South Asia, the equivalent term is Sarvodaya, which means not just well-being of all. The all part everybody understands, the sarva meaning which is all. But the important thing is the well-being. The well-being part is more important. And if we are going to measure anything, let us measure actual well-being. Water, soil, air, education, food, shelter, how much actually people experienced and were able to get on a sustained basis, one. And two, what are the systems in place to help them to hold on and survive when there are big climate events. Thank you.
Thank you so much everyone for such insightful comments. आज हमने बहुत कुछ सुना, बहुत सीखा और बहुत धारण किया है. We've learned a lot today, and I would now like to invite Abhay to share his concluding remarks. Thanks. Over to you, Abhay.
Thanks very much, Vedita, and thank you very much to each and every one of the panelists. I think I've just had an absolute treat listening to each one of you. I've been furiously trying to scribble down notes as well, and one thought that's been in my mind has been how we really need to have, I think, dedicated sessions for each of the big ideas that has come across. I mean, the tragedy of this kind of format, of course, is you get to see something that really changes your perception, and then unfortunately it's gone. So you have to really hold on to that and try and follow up with that person who shared that or gave you that glimpse. I'm not going to attempt, I think, a summary or even in any sense a neat synthetic conclusion, right? I think in the spirit of this conference and in the spirit of this panel itself, I want to, through my concluding comments, destabilize this idea of one universal truth we can take away. I think we've heard a sort of multitude of voices. These are voices, of course, of our panelists, but also the communities, the supporters, the geographies, the life worlds, if you wish, not just human worlds, but life worlds, including seas, fish, rivers, forests, birds, soils, ancestors. All of that, in some sense, have already come into this space, and in the sort of evocative phrase of the Zapatistas, which is, in my opinion, the best description of this idea of a pluriverse, a world in which many worlds fit, would perhaps be one decisive way to move towards a more radically demanding account of climate justice and of the global commons, right? That is, let us not be sort of caged or boxed or monocultured or measured or labeled or in some sense marked with something that takes away the difference, right? And I think sort of drew huge inspiration from how even the panelists today were speaking with each other and speaking with each other's constituencies, with each other's learnings, with each other's inspirations in such a thoughtful, mindful, elegant way, right? It was what I was seeing was, of course, the braiding together of something without necessarily blending it in a machine and making it a uniform substance, allowing it to keep its difference and braiding it together. That said, I think before I say thank you, a few thoughts that I think have registered on my scape as I was listening would have been these. One, in some sense, the framing and the language itself is very generative of who are the ones who decide and who are the ones who follow the decisions, who are the ones who govern and who are the ones who are governed, right? And we saw through this panel that even the words of the conference right? What is a global commons? Is there an idea of the global commons? Was sort of provocatively posed by Jesu, and I think that's a great question, right? And we saw subsequently how climate and carbon space, etc., sort of sometimes unproblematically slip into this assumption that there is a global commons and that we are all equally beholden to protect, preserve it in some way, right? Rajni introduced another provocation. Is climate justice really the correct way to describe what's going on in this part of the world, right? Our community is really thinking and talking about climate justice. Is that an accurate representation of what is alive and important for them, right? And even in India, in the context of environmentalists in India, there is a nice bridge, right? The older generation of environmentalists are a little skeptical of this new generation of climate practitioners. They're like, hello, we've been talking about these issues for so long, about forests, about air, about water, and suddenly you're sort of converting it all into how does this equate to climate, right? And I think that's a good thought to stay with for a while as well. That is, would a community use climate justice to describe its own not just its own predicament, but also its own contribution to our collective well-being. One of the panelists that we contacted, when we offered her these questions, she was like, my women will not make sense of these questions. What is climate justice? What is global commons? So she politely excused herself from the event, right? And I think that is an important point to stay with. How might we have a language that allows community to be at an, if not equal, at a comfortable position while sharing their learning, their knowledge, their wisdom, right? Without necessarily always feeling like, oh, this is a term that I don't fully appreciate or understand. What many panelists brought up would be, I think, the need to have revisionist accounts of commons and of climate justice, right? Particularly in Kumari Bai's words, we saw a sense of commons that does not come across from the most well footnoted or researched academic paper, right? She was like, yeah, with agriculture, at some stage the tap goes off, but the forest is always abundant. The forest is always akin to my place of ever-flowing goodness, right? The forest never disappoints, right? We saw Myles talk about how the souls of the departed go back to the foothills of the Kanchenjunga, and how that relationship with the commons of the river is really, in some sense, what we need to hold on to, not forget. And so I think another takeaway for me was, how do we really, in some sense, inflect the discourse around commons with this rich narrative of stories, with stories of fisher communities, with stories of resistance to fascist governments, right? Anil spoke truth to power straight off. He was like, yeah, we can talk about lots of things, but let's not sort of hesitate to name the problem that we in India face today, right? And so that was another theme that came up as well. We, I think, need to continue to stay with this difficult, dangerous, definitely unpopular, non-rewarding, but very, very noble practice of speaking truth to power. Final point, I think the role of women and young people was brought up in very many different ways. I personally think, if at all one has to think of the climate crisis as being caused by someone, it was caused by a man who could not sit in the room by himself. And so we need to, in some sense, allow the women, not allow the women, we need to recognize that women and our children might have the answers we are looking for. So I'll end with a recognition that Jesu also made, that the right time is now. It's a point that came up with Rajni, it came up with Anil, it came up with many people, right? The right time is now, and we should not, in some sense, hesitate to hope. We should not hesitate to recognize the advances we have made, and we should not hesitate to, like we have done today, show up, no matter if this recording was scheduled on a Sunday afternoon with very, very busy people, but showing up and sharing is the start often of something magical. So a huge thank you to Namrata and Vedita and others at the Initiative for Climate Action for organizing this session. I think I cannot express in words my gratitude to our panelists, Anil Tarath Varghese, Rajni Bakshi, Mayalmit Lepcha, Jesu Retinam, and Kumari Bai Jamkatan, who have all really shared so generously. A huge thank you to the University of California, Santa Barbara for organizing this conference, making it accessible for us, being quite generous and patient with us. Professor John Foran and colleagues there as well. And finally, a huge thank you to everyone who listens to the recording and takes this message where it needs to go. I wish you a beautiful rest of your day. I don't know what time you'll encounter this, and thank you and see you soon. Maybe I'll invite everybody in the room to unmute, and in a noisy way, we can just say bye.
Thank you. Thank you for
Bye,
holding
bye, bye.
this.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, bye, bye.